Hey everybody, it's Bill MacDonald. Welcome to the ER, the emergency room for extended responses and editing, revising, recorded training. This portion is brought to you free just to help those of you who had kids that you worked 2 semesters on an entire year, and then for whatever reason, they just were not able to get out of what I call zero land or la la land. Now, one of the things that I'm going to just be honest with is that many students, when you get them, are not on the passage or even the paragraph level, and some are not even on the sentence level. So asking students to understand a topic written in a sentence and be able to come up with a central idea, a controlling idea, a thesis statement about that topic, a claim or an opinion, and they have to pick one side of that statement or the other, like third grade did. It's very difficult. So what I'm going to do on a series of videos is show you each prompt and break it into sections, because when your students are not on the sentence level, this is something that you might want to try with them next year, that attack the prompt by breaking it down into pieces like a puzzle. You know, when you're getting a puzzle out of the box, you kind of separate the pieces, you put all the corners and the sides in place, the tops and the bottoms, and that makes it kind of easier to put the rest of the pieces back together. Well, that's what I'm going to do uh, with a puzzle for third grade, uh, where I took apart the prompt and broke it into pieces. But first, I want to show you just a reminder so that you, whatever grade level that you teach, you can look and see. There's the grade level in the left-hand column, English and Spanish for third, fourth, and fifth grade. The number of students that got not 2 zeros, remember, they got 3 zeros. Because if I'm the writing doctor, you don't say as Bugs Bunny, "What's up, doctor?" You say, "What's up, doc?" Okay. And so the two readers had to give the students a zero in what was known as organization and development, and or a zero in conventions in order to get a zero from that reader. And so if the reader felt like, for whatever reason, the organization and development was a zero, the student automatically got a zero. And so that's what I want to focus on. So take a look real quick, cut the percentages. They're pretty high in most of the elementary. Uh, the highest one altogether, percentage wise, was the third grade Spanish. The highest number wise that we know for sure was the fourth grade uh, English. And the English also was the highest percent in terms of students getting 2 zeros from two different readers. So when I saw that, I thought I need to have a training this summer and into the school year to help students and teachers figure out what's a way to help kids not have this happen again, so that even if they're not on the sentence level, they can work on one detail at a time on the prompt or topic. But first, we have to actually find the topic. So I came up with this acronym called BESTIES. I want you and I to become besties as I teach it to you over the next week or so. Then you and your students will become besties as you kind of get this into their system, because I've added several words after this, but this is the basics just to get us started. There's a whole bunch of reasons that we're going to learn that your students can get two zeros. And then hopefully by the time the STAR test comes around next year, the students can be besties with the acronym besties and make sure that they don't have any trouble. So it says bullets. There'll be 9 of them. Okay. So if you look at my little number puzzle, there's 9 pieces. Even though there's 25 words, sometimes there's going to be a lot of words on a prompt, but there's 9 bullets. Okay. Pay especially close attention to this 0, because even though that's not a bullet, that's something that I want to bring out. And we'll do it right now. The next thing that they have to look for is the word explain. In the old days, they had to look for the word write. But now, all of 3rd through 10th grade, regardless of which purpose of writing, you had to, you were going to see the word explain. Now, we don't know how they're going to use the correspondence yet, and if they're going to have the word explain or if they'll have the word write, but you're probably going to have to explain something about a certain topic. Okay. So once you see the word explain, I want you to look at on the back here. I broke the 3rd grade prompt into sections. Section 0 said explain. So if your students don't understand even where to go, they're going to end up with what this little number looks like right here, a 0. Okay. The number that's in the ones place was the W that is supposed to be your student idea. They're going to say, clearly state your central idea, clearly state your controlling idea, your thesis, maybe your claim or your opinion sometimes. And so that was because that was the first bullet. In order to get from 0 land to 1 land, you had to not just address the topic, the T, the topic, you had to be thinking in your head, which of the W's are they asking me to respond to? And so for the 3rd through 10th grade, I went ahead and made this little flower, red light being what is the topic? Because as you can see on my advanced folder, what is the prompt? What is the topic? What's the question? Okay. That's for short answer, which is very similar to my extended constructed response. What is the prompt? What is the topic? Now we're going to skip introduction right now. We're just going to focus on coming up with a central idea, a clear central controlling idea, thesis statement, or claim or opinion. Okay. And we have to make sure the students are not just restating the prompt, restating the topic, but they're responding to it. You can restate, but you have to actually respond and think in your head, which W are they asking me about? And so I've gone ahead and included that on the folder when you're asking me why I chose an idea. I have to base it on evidence, but I've also got to figure out which one of the W's they're asking me of the who, what, when, where, why, which, and how. Because if I can't figure that out, then as you saw here, this first little number represents the first bullet, the because part. Okay. And so as you see, if you kind of think backwards here, 0, 1, 2, 3 is on the first row, 4, 5, and 5 are on the second row. And because the 3rd grade was either or, it's going to be either this choice or this one that your students had to pick, and then to give their opinion why they chose it. They couldn't just pick the side. They couldn't just do a whether statement. Or which one. They had to say why as part of their central idea. And then 6, 7, 8, 9 were the last one. So let me go ahead and show you on the puzzle first. Explain why, in my opinion, because they said in your opinion. So you could start with um, that phrase, or it could be somewhere in the middle of the sentence. People, nothing here in the middle. Lots of words that could be added if you want to choose to fill in. Either should be or should not be. They've got to decide. And so, because the selection had one passage saying why people should be, and the other one said why they should not be, then your kids had to decide which one. So that's why in third grade, the scoring says be sure to at least include your one selection in your response. And so I'm going to show you that real quick right here for pairs in 3 through 5. Evidence is drawn from at least one text for a 2 or a 3. So you only had to pick one side or the other because one passage was giving you why they should get rewards for recycling, which we'll see in a second, and one was saying why they should not be. Okay. And so then rewarded for when recycling. Notice that I have them all in caps and lower cases so you can change the order of the words in different ways. And we're not going to do too many because we're trying to help kids who really struggle. We just got to have them keep it as simple as possible, but remembering to add their why based on evidence. And then I left that period there to remind your students that that has to be part of their central controlling idea, their thesis statement. So where did I get that from? I got it from the the prompts. And so uh, I want to show you real quick. There's several W's that could be asked as part of the topic. Okay. So as your kids are reading that, the first thing was to say, let me look for the bullets. Okay. That means I'm going to be writing an essay. Then let me look for the word explain, because explain is going to be where the topic was. And then as you saw, like I did on the puzzle, I separated them into actual puzzle pieces, separate the topic into E, Z, or E, Z, sections, however many sections that we need to. In the case of the one that we're going to look at for third grade, you saw that I had written little phrases, little details on each puzzle piece. So as soon as they read the topic, they have to realize that as part of their topic, they're not just going to be restating all of those words. They're going to look for one of these W's that's written in a statement form, but they want to know what idea your students come with based on evidence. So as you look at me, I'm going to try to model what they look like here. There's what, my head is going like this. Why, I'm making that YMCA. How, whether or which, my hands are out to the side, whether or not blah, blah, or bling, which one or the other. I have to pick which one of these. And so should they reward recycling when people do it, or should they not reward people for recycling? They have to pick one idea. So they have to make their opinion. And so remember, if you break an O apart, it makes two little C's. They have to make a claim or a central idea about the reason why they should be rewarded for recycling or the reason why they shouldn't be, but it should be based on evidence. The other ones are the when, the who, like you say with an owl, and the where. So as you can tell I put little numbers. So for third grade, they sort of asked a whether, but the students had to pick which one, but they had to go beyond that and give a reason why they chose one of the two answers. Fourth grade was also a why, and ninth grade. Eighth grade, we'll see a what. Fifth, sixth, seventh, and 10th, they asked a how question. And third grade, as I mentioned, was the which. And so red light, you have to connect the topic with the question of one of those W's to make what's called a central idea statement, a controlling idea statement, a thesis statement, a claim, or an opinion that's based on evidence. And so this is something that I taught during the year, that before you can answer, before you can respond, before you can even restate, you have to go straight to TEA. Go straight from the topic and look for the W that has an answer. Look at for the evidence. And whichever one you decide, like in the case of third grade, I've got to see which evidence is easier to explain or which selection has more evidence that I understand. Then I can answer with my response called my central idea statement. But too many students were told as soon as you read the topic, start restating the topic, start responding to it. Well, if you haven't even read the evidence, you don't know which side you're going to pick. And so that's why some kids had so many problems. Okay. So I'm going to show you, because I wrote them out for you. This is the third grade. This is not the actual paper, but I went ahead and wrote this down for my guidance and for teachers who just wanted a little bit of help. Um, Many of you have access to the prompts, the topics through your different programs, um, Cambium being one of them, the main one that many of you have. So it says here, the prompts and purposes of writing for the spring 2023 extended constructed response essays. The bold underlined question marks in red under each prompt represents an idea your students were supposed to come up with in response to the prompt as part of their central idea statement, the controlling idea statement. So there's the bold in, there's the bold words, okay? And then their question mark, they had to come up with an idea about that, okay? So here is the third grade prompt. We said, look for bullets. Then, in order to find the prompt, they were supposed to have written the word prompt, but I didn't see that in most cases. So it might have been on a section that I wasn't able to have access to. But the next thing they had to do was look for the word explain as part of their idea. You could even have looked for the word essay, because that would have been on one of the sentence. And even though composition doesn't start with essay, those two words are interchangeable. And then I'm going to separate the topic into easier sections, and then we'll make sure we include each section when we write our central idea statement. So here we go. Third grade, explain. There's how I get off of zero land. I got to get to where the topic is. Okay. Your opinion, detail, my opinion about. I don't really need that word, but I could use it if I want to. Why? So because that's as part of the topic, that has to be part of the central idea statement, which we'll discuss in a moment. Should, and it says or, so I put should be, should not be. That means I've got to pick one of those two. That's the which. Okay. Which one? And you also have to answer why. So because you had to do two W's here, a which, one of them, and a why, that's what made it so hard for your students. What? Rewarded for recycling. Why should people recycle? No. So let's look at the next part. Central idea, AKA, also known as one claim, one opinion, one argument, the cause being recycling. Because people are recycling, transition, what would the effect be? Why should they be rewarded or why should they not be rewarded? What would happen positively if we were rewarded? What would happen negatively if we were not rewarded? What would happen positively if we uh, did not allow people to get rewards for recycling? So as you can see here, it does say read the selections rewards for recycling. That was the selection that said that there should be some rewards. Laws for less trash was the one that said there shouldn't be rewards. You should just make rules for people to follow because of some things that they felt were negative. And so your students had to decide probably which one of these two selections had evidence they understood more, so they could pick that side of the argument and make a claim using one of those two. Okay, something very important, and I've mentioned it, for a clear central idea statement, there needs to be a reason for or against rewarding people for recycling, not just a recycling, sorry, should be or not be rewarded. I'm going to circle that so I don't forget to fix that typo for you. Okay. For the state average, out of 10 possible points from two readers, it got 2.53, 2 and 53 hundredths out of 10 points, which means when I divided that by the two readers, that means each grader gave the student an average of 1 and 27 hundredths. So what that means in this case, when you look at my quick check scoring guide, for the zero, it means that they had to give a zero on everything, but an average of 1.25, that means that most of the students ended up getting a 1 on development and organization and probably a 0 in conventions. That means the conventions were too weak because as you see here, that if you end up getting a 0, if you decide that the organization is a 0, my first bullet for a 0 in convention says anytime that you get a 0 from the reader, singular or plural, in development or organization, it's an automatic 0 in conventions because you can have the best conventions in the world. And I understand some of you are frustrated by that. But if you're responding, if I ask you a question, Q, about a certain thing, a certain topic, a certain teaks, uh, and I'm asking you to type something, T, about that topic in a sentence called a central idea statement, a claim statement, I would expect you to actually respond to my question. So if your conventions are really great, but they're about something that has nothing to do with the question I asked, I can't give you credit for having great grammar because it's possible, and we're going to see this in some of the reasons for zeros, that your students just regurgitated some exact words from somewhere on the prompt page or somewhere in one of the two selections. If that's all that's there is great grammar that somebody else wrote, then that's not testing your students' grammar, that's testing somebody else's grammar. So that's one of the main reasons. Okay. So the one we're going to focus on here is that the controlling idea, the thesis or the claim is missing, and that both readers feel that. Now, you can say that it's also vague okay, or that it's confusing, that it's hard to understand. That could become down here that it's just so hard to comprehend the typing or the expression of thought in words that are typed, then of course I I will be able to say, because I don't understand what you have, I don't know if there's a thesis or a claim there or not. So how do I try to get to one land using the actual words from the prompt? Okay. So I already know based on these puzzle pieces that I want to get most of them in here. Now, this is the one that we have to make sure that's there. And so I would suggest on the whys that you teach your students to put that puzzle piece last. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways to have the other pieces first. Okay. People, in my opinion, should be rewarded, sorry, rewarded for recycling, period. And so you notice that I used all of the pieces except for one. If you don't tell me the reason, that's an unclear or that's a vague answer. So it's possible that some students got zeros because all they did was pick one side of the other. They didn't respond to the specific demands. In other words, if they ask you a reason why, a because, you have to include it. So it might have sounded something like this. People, in my opinion, should be rewarded for or when recycling because, and the idea I told you had to be based on evidence. Your students had to go into either the section, as you can see up here in third grade, rewards for recycling, something that said that rewarding people for recycling was going to be a good thing, or they had to go to laws for less trash and they had to say the opposite. People, in my opinion, should not be rewarded for or when they're recycling. And then we saved that puzzle piece for last. The one, the central idea, I've got to figure out based on my own interpretation. If I'm going to explain why, if you watch my hand for a second, when you infer, I'm rubbing my fur, you're reading between the lines. Okay. When you're explaining, I made an X and then I made a plain wing, set of wings. You're actually writing between the lines. And so, based on the introduction of the passage, the body, however much evidence is inside there, each evidence example explained and exploded. They're going to find some evidence in there and they're going to see a conclusion as well, introduction, body, conclusion. So they'll have to decide which one they're going to pick. So uh, I, in order to get to one land, they had to go somewhere inside the evidence called rewards for recycling, or the other one called laws for less trash. Okay. And give at least a reason why that's based on evidence. Because remember, I told you we have to think of TEA, that I need to go straight from the topic to the evidence on both sides. It's like I'm looking for clues, I'm looking for evidence as if I'm some sort of detective. Okay. Uh, just a couple other simple orders. You could start with, in my opinion. In my opinion, comma, people should be rewarded for recycling because blah, 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 something they find in the passage, period. and then they can use the evidence. They can, you know, go the organization. They're going to tell you hopefully where the evidence is, either with or without quotations, and then they can try their best to explain the evidence because in order to go from a one to a two to a three, you have to go from the idea to the evidence and the way that you explain and hopefully explode that evidence with what I call the who, what, when, where, why, which, how, and wow, which is also known as tone. That's the voice and the spice, which we'll get into when I'm trying to show you how to get to three land, four land, and five land when it comes to development, organization, and conventions. Okay, so uh, the opposite, in my opinion, people, and again, notice that it said include each section. So I'm including all of the sections that I divided this puzzle piece into. In my opinion, people should not be rewarded for or when recycling because blah, 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 blah. Pick one of the evidence from the laws for recycling, period. And that way, for sure, your students will probably have a better chance of picking one. So, do I see any more capital letters? Yes, I see rewarded here. Okay. Sorry, recycling. Capital. Recycling should be rewarded for people, in my opinion, because, and again, you don't have to get fancy, but I do feel like your students have to have what I call around the words in many ways, how to be able to attack the prompts and the details of each prompt and separate them into little sections like this so that if I had um, I had to put tape on these to hold them together easier, but when I do the fourth grade one, I went ahead and left the tape off so that I can just pick the most important ones and I can actually pull the pieces out and I can move the pieces around in a certain order. Okay. So I'm going to say that for third grade, if your students did not include, and this is going to be the main reasons, they left out the rewarded part, they left out the reason, they forgot to say the reason, they forgot to even get to the right section, the explain section, okay? Or they forgot to focus on these two ideas together, rewarded for recycling. Another reason that I think some kids might have struggled, if they know what cycling is because of the word bicycle or tricycle, perhaps unicycle, they might have thought that recycling, if they didn't bother to read the text, was cycling and then going recycling. That means going on your bike a bunch of times. And so I'm just trying to get into the heads and the hearts of kids to understand what would have caused, as you saw there, just as a reminder, why were there 151,000 zeros in English? And I haven't even looked at the Spanish one yet, but just as you can see, the percentage of zeros in that one was even higher. And so if they went ahead and just translated this same this text into Spanish, it seemed to have been difficult for both the English and the Spanish students because those were some pretty high percentages. So that's not the way, but I will say that it's a way to be able to respond to a prompt. Uh, because if we don't have an idea about the prompt, it's sort of like not having a head. Now, we need to make sure that when we get to introduction and conclusion, think of the word introducing and ending or end. We have to have not indented paragraphs. That's not what they meant. And a lot of you were confused or frustrated or upset because you didn't see you taught paragraphs and you taught indentions. Well, that was never mentioned in the scoring guides. It was mentioned in curriculum, but for the sake of essays, they thought of them as a rough draft because the student was doing them, students were doing them in a limited time. And so when we get to that second part, introducing the topic had to be done or introducing your idea. And so as long as they felt like the student was doing one of those, and if they were ending with the topic or ending with the idea, with if what you want to call restating or responding, that's all they cared about. No, the central idea statement did not have to be at the beginning, but I will say this, I had several grader friends who did tell me that if the student waited too long, uh, they, if they were not careful, would not have realized that they had a central idea statement somewhere closer to the middle or towards the end. And I noticed that high school students sometimes tend to kind of give their evidence and their explanations, and then they kind of throw in their idea at the end. And it might not be a good idea if the readers are having to grade so many papers in a short amount of time. In case you weren't aware, the readers had to grade. Uh, they were given, I believe, about $12 to $15 an hour, and they were allowed to grade anywhere between 8 to 12 hours per day. And another thing that made a difference was that to have the motivation or incentive to grade more, if the teachers who were graders could grade up to 250 hours, let's say for an 8 hour or more day, then they would get a $30 bonus. And it wasn't a requirement, it was just an incentive. And let's say half of 250 is 125. So if you were, let's say, a 4 hour grader, then from my understanding, from several of the graders, if you graded for 4 hours in that range, and as long as you had 125 essays. And when I was doing the math for that, it meant that you were, as a reader, were having to read an essay about every 2 minutes or less in order to get to that minimum. And that would be for the 4 hours or 8 hours. Now, if you were grading 9, 10, 11, 12 hours, your brain was probably going to be fried for one, but they weren't giving an additional bonus for grading. So hopefully, once the teachers passed the minimum number for the incentive bonus of 15 or $30 for that day, then they were, reading carefully, but trying to keep the pace. Something else I will say is that they were given essays that were already scored by other people, and so to keep uh, the integrity or the validity of the test intact, they if their scores that they gave did not match up with the uh, test essays that were the sample ones that were thrown in there, then they let them know, hey, your score didn't match. And so they were kind of encouraged to be more careful. And if it kept happening, then of course they had to be retrained. And they had lots of different ways to calibrate. Um, but just from the teacher perspective, I understand some of your frustration when you're teaching 2 whole semesters. You don't want to base your success or failure on 2 minutes. So I just want to say right up front here that, and I put this as a post a couple weeks ago, that base your success on the growth and the improvement that your students showed throughout the entire year in 2 whole semesters of teaching the entire writing, reading, short answer, the different types of uh, non-multiple choice responses, the short constructed responses with answer evidence. All those things were important. So that's the third grade. I apologize that that one took me a little longer. It's just that that's my first time showing it to all of you. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. You can message me if you had a question. This is recorded, so it's not like an interactive um, video, but it will be. Several people always ask me questions through Messenger or through email. So feel free to check in with me if you have a question or you need help with something. Now, because many of you have access to your essays, then use this information that I shared with you to see if perhaps for third grade, since we've covered just third grade on this video, was one of those missing puzzle pieces the reason why the students got zeros. Because if there was nothing about rewards or recycling, not rewarding for recycling, or not giving a reason, then those were all reasons for the reader to say, this is too vague, this is incomplete, it's unclear what uh, your idea is because you didn't answer all of what we asked. We didn't want you just to tell us which one. We wanted to know why you chose that one as part of your central idea statement. So that's a tough one. I get you. But hopefully this kind of just helps some of you get an idea of maybe some tweaks that will help those kids who struggle with writing, mainly because they struggle with reading. God bless you guys and take care.